All right, so we're talking today now about exiting your writing. How do you say farewell to your reader? Your conclusion, okay? So, how are you ending, but with a purpose? And as you remember, you opened the door to your writing with a very descriptive introduction for this piece. So, you got them engaged right away. And then you've presented the case surrounding your character's psychological state. But now the final two big questions here that you want to be asking yourself and presenting for the reader are so what and who cares? Okay. The who cares, I mean, really, you've got to make your audience care. This is your last opportunity to get them to care about what you just wrote about. And so keep your audience in mind. Obviously, your audience is your teacher. But who is reading 60 plus of these. So keep that in mind. You want to be unique. You want to be original. But if you're thinking in the lens of you being a psychologist for this assignment, you're writing to a community of psychologists. So you don't want to just regurgitate what you just shared with them or share a summary of your theory, which by now they know. You need to bring something new to the table. And that leads to the so what. So after, as you're trying to figure out, like, okay, well then what do I say? It's kind of that bigger connection to, why should we care about this? Why is this relevant for us? What is this saying? What is your piece saying about the larger human condition? To be sure, your so what is not a summary. Okay, like I said with the who cares, you're not just regurgitating what you just said in your whole piece because we already read it. We know that. So you'll see on the assignment sheet, the final two sections of this assignment are questions about human nature and the human condition. And then 7 is analyze the big picture problem. And those can really be combined, and they're very connected to each other. You can probably combine them into a single section. Excuse me. But as you're thinking about this big picture problem, based on what you've learned about your character in your analysis, in your profile, in your comparison, in your contrast with the other character, what interesting questions about your topic, humanity, society, can you raise for your audience to get them thinking, to make it relevant? Remember that bigger so what? So you'll present those questions and then you try to answer some of them and think about it and think about that commentary. So as you're branching out, remember those big thematic topics we've come back to a lot in this module. I mean, you're not limited to these, of course, based on where you go with your analysis, you might find something brand new, but these are definitely on the table. So that idea of ambition, duty, strength versus uncertainty, good versus evil, fate versus free will. What questions can you raise about those topics? Okay. And I want to encourage you again to remember your audience. So, if you find you have your topic, you've thought about your character, you presented your profile, but what am I trying to say? If you don't come up with a great question, then you're letting down your audience. You're shortchanging your audience, and it's kind of insulting to your audience a little bit. So some examples of not so great questions you want to be posing, and I'll explain why. And I should say first, these are all out of context. So in context, depending on what you do with them, I don't want to say all the time these are horrible questions, but for the purpose of what we're doing, I would have a hard time seeing them work, I think. So first, just asking, what does it mean to be human? This is a great question. I think the issue, though, with this assignment, it's very big. I would hope that with your assignment, you take a more narrow focus than just the meaning of humanity in general. So your question should be a little more narrowed in, considering everything you just presented. Here, what could have happened to make Macbeth act differently? With this question, we're not really broadening out to our real world. We're not thinking about the commentary on the human condition and what it means to be human today and the relevancy. we're staying in the text. And even in the text, like we're trying to make predictions about what could have happened differently. And you know, oftentimes those end up going in directions that aren't rooted in the text. So, I mean, yeah, not so great. And then how is this relevant today? Essentially, yes, that's what you're doing with your bigger so what. But if you just ask this question straight up, I'll tell you right now, as your teacher, it's pretty clear, like, oh, I'm just working down the list of, okay, now I need to make a connection to today. So how is this relevant today? Well, here's another connection from my own life that I saw. That's how it's relevant. This question lends itself to a weaker conclusion. So I would encourage you to try to think more specifically about a topic related to being human that you can explore. Okay, some better questions. And again, just example, please, well, don't use these. I tried to pick topics that maybe aren't associated with anything with Macbeth, but you could see some of the complexity here. What causes us as humans to be resistant to change? So if you've just written a piece about a character resisting change or experiencing a dramatic change, then, you know, why do we resist change sometimes? Okay, even though we understand how bad it feels to be alone, why don't we reach out more often to those who are lonely? My freshmen are reading of Mice and Men, and we created this question together, you know, as we were thinking about the theme. So that's a good complex one. And again, as you're trying to think of these questions, sometimes it helps to come back to that structural stuff we've talked about. Notice how we're starting off with a dependent clause. It already adds to the complexity just doing that. Yeah. Okay. A note before we look at the sample, and I actually have another note too, is be careful to avoid presenting a series of morals for your reader. Okay, so you want to think more thematically in your conclusion and in your piece, but mostly in that conclusion and the exit, the commentary on what it means to be human and that bigger relevancy. The reason why, and you'll see, here's an example of a moral. Be wary of the advice you receive from strangers. It's telling my reader to do something. It's giving them, you know, it's beware of the advice you receive from strangers. It's kind of ironic because this could be advice you're getting from a stranger. But it takes on a more like, hey, I'm going to teach you a lesson about life. I know about life and you don't. So please let me teach you. Which isn't necessarily the tone you want to take on for this sort of piece where you've just analyzed a character. Instead, you want to provide that commentary on what it means to be human, on what your new learning has illuminated for you about what it means to be human. So again, you're not married to this structure, but this often helps us think in that way. We as humans value, believe, need, want, struggle with. Another strong verb, what? Okay. And that comes back to some of those thematic questions like up here. Okay. The other note before the sample is as you are answering these questions in your analysis, some of you might find that you write like 2 sentences and then you're like, okay, I don't really have anything else to say. In that case, I would encourage you to keep asking why. Okay. And if it helps, and it does probably help, go find somebody to talk through your ending section, your exit with, and tell them to keep asking you why. When you make a claim about something, about how we act as humans, why? Why do we do that? Okay. So like I mentioned how I did this with my freshmen this week. This idea started off as they were observing about the characters and of Mice and Men feeling, all these characters feeling lonely in chapter 4, but still being mean to each other. Why? And then we eventually kept asking why, till we got to kind of this bigger question, bigger point. And then we kept going. So ask why. Okay. I've just got a few seconds left. So I've got the sample down here. I'm going to, not going to read it all right now, but I'd like you to pause and read it because we're going to talk about it in class tomorrow or soon. Okay.